It's green? Okay, great. So, of memory, agency, identity, and nostalgia, Eastern Ukrainians, and the politics of de-communization. So this research was done in 2015. This is when I started my fieldwork in Kharkiv. I was working on children's summer camps under late Soviet Union, specifically under Khrushchev's and Brezhnev's rule. And I thought that I'm coming with that this is a very innocent topic, and I thought that I was well equipped and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I came to Kharkiv to talk to people and learn about their experiences of Soviet childhood. I also considered it a very low, how to say, low danger topic. For my IRB, it was like there is literally no danger to my interviewees, no issues. And then I'm coming to the city, I start my research, and people just don't want to talk to me. Sometimes they reject an interview very fast. Sometimes it happens after a couple of days when they talk to someone. And this conundrum starts resolving when I get to a trade union official who tells me that she doesn't want to be recorded because she's afraid that SBU might be listening to her. And this is when I discovered the big gap in my understanding of the influence of de-communization laws on my interviewees, because on April 9, 2015, Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine adopted these de-communization laws, and among other things, they criminalized public displays of communist regimes propaganda, and which was more relevant to my research, public rejection of the criminal character of the communist totalitarian regime in Ukraine in 1991. I did not honestly take these whole formulations very seriously until I received a letter from an archive of an enterprise that I tried to study, telling me that my research might be a criminal act. It turned out it wasn't, because research was still legal. But the problem with people not talking to me proceeded, and it resolved only thanks to the fact that I had relatives in this city, and this was the only way that people agreed to participate in my research. What was the problem with the de-communization laws? Well, I think it was not just the de-communization laws. They were also accompanied by a public discourse that was essentially blaming Eastern Ukrainian population for the unfolding of the war, and accompanied by Volodymyr Vyatrovich's ascendance to power and prominence in the public discourse. And Vyatrovich basically established a connection between Soviet nostalgia and the war again. I can literally quote him. It's an important quote. So what Vyatrovich said, it was, we need to understand that Russian propaganda uses Ukrainians' nostalgic feelings to mobilize them in fighting against Ukraine. The majority of the fighters against Ukraine in DNR and LNR are people for whom the Soviet past is the sense of life. Thus, if we do not do anything with this Soviet past, then the danger of the Russian aggression dissemination will continue hanging over us. So that was a call for action. And also Vyatrovich established associations between exactly those Lenin's monuments and lack of entrepreneurial skills, self-isolation, all these bad things that did not allow people of Eastern Ukraine to move forward. Well, Eastern Ukrainian population did not really perceive this loss enthusiastically, as we can see, and I can tell that from the, at least, the interviews that I conducted, and in this respect, I really would like to even just rethink whether we should be talking about nostalgia in this case. Because in classical interpretation, nostalgic feelings are more or less passive state, and it's a longing for something that is irreversibly lost. Not exactly an action of bringing the past to the present, reenacting it. And I do not think that if we just wrap all the discourses through which Eastern Ukrainians are assessing their current lives, using their Soviet experiences in the word nostalgia, we are going to understand what is happening, how they are creating those assessments, and how they are, what needs to be done to strengthen their sense of belonging to this political and economic project. I think that Soviet nostalgia is just way too reductionist in this respect. And the messages that I got through the interviews that I recorded, and you can read the narratives. They are very, very interesting in the paper when it is on the website. But the first big message was we were not victims, because one of the narratives about the Soviet past started depicting it as the time of just suffering. It was suffering from 1970 to 1991 in an oppressive totalitarian regime. And my interviews were like, I was happy. I had a happy life. Which is very interesting because they were, this happy life was presented through abundance, access to resources, and the only resource that they were bringing up so far was food, which is also very telling about the economic situation and the effects of the past and present on the way people still think of prosperity, because we don't have other goods. Like, they are literally talking about access to food. And then there was another message, and that was apparently longing for unity. And this longing for unity was expressed in different ways. There was a range of ideas. Some of them were connected to the discomfort of being put on the spot in regard to this association with Russianness. So the recollections come that we lived in harmony with the Ukrainians. We don't understand what's happening now. But there was another interesting narrative that was, we lack an idea that would give us hope and also unite us, to help us feel that we are all together in this. That I found even more interesting because, again, I had interviews which represented a wide range of views. Some of them were more radical, some of them, a lot of them were much less radical. Yet still, what I saw is that de-communization was producing this further alienation from the Ukrainian political project, and I think that this is a problem. We went through this. And when I submitted a paper, I mostly focused on the narrative analysis, on the means through which people are conveying the message. But for this presentation, I also wanted to insert a little bit of facts of life that I think worth taking into account. So, for example, when Vetrovich is claiming that we are people who nostalgize about the USSR are the passive people who lack entrepreneurial skills, who cannot adapt to the new realities. My interviewees, if we look at them, are not that. So, for example, the most fascinating example is actually Valentina Annenkova. All these names are changed. There are no real names right now here, even though, except for Valentina, I obtained permission to use real names. It's still a question for me whether I would like to do that. Annenkova is, first of all, she was the only interviewee who decided to use her right not to answer my question, which I find quite amazing. She also was very, very critical of current life in Ukraine, but she and she talked about her Soviet past in a very positive manner. But she was born in something like 1945, and this is the woman who decided not to enter Komsomol, which during that time is a very bold decision that could affect her life, her education, and her professional promotion. And she just never joined. Valentina Annenkova was the head of a department in a big engineering enterprise, and she is still occupying a managerial position as a secretary of the educational office. And she was basically telling me that children are going hungry in this country. And at first I was more like, well, this sounds quite radical. I will just analyze it as a narrative, a metaphor and so on. But then, because my mom is also a teacher, a music teacher, and I know a little bit of context about the functioning of music schools in Ukraine. The problem is that that some children in that music school are actually going hungry. Because music education is the cheapest extracurricular activity that you can have in Ukraine. Moreover, for families with many children, it's free. And very often, and these families are usually not middle class. They are either very rich or very poor and very, very dysfunctional. So, and even my mom has several students of hers who I'm sure are going hungry occasionally. So what these people say is actually based on it's a correlation between perceptions, but also certain facts. In which respect the approach to the problem of simply saying that the state's approach to the problem by simply saying that we have a population that is unable to adapt and thinks in a very, very bad way, on the one hand, does not really go that far from Soviet practices, where you not exactly taking responsibility for the problems that are happening in the country, and is really unproductive because it causes radicalization of views, because I would think that at least my experience with Kharkiv would say that they were much more blurred and much more in the gray area before the war evolved and the public discourse changed significantly towards Eastern Ukraine. And in 2015, they were looking a little bit scary, to be honest. Not through the interviews I recorded mostly, but through just the discussions on the workplaces that my parents witnessed. Thank you.